them yourself and read them through before taking this tour. Okay? So basically what these instructions ask you to do is, in step 1 is to view the training video, which at this point you would have finished. In step 2, load the CD in your computer and click Here First icon, and that will again take you up to that startup screen. Okay? And then to take the tour, what we'll be doing is clicking on some things on the startup screen, and I'll share that with you in just a moment. A couple of ways to begin the tour. One is you can simply click on this pink link right here to begin the tour, and that takes you to the startup screen or the home page. Or you can simply begin with that home page yourself. To tell you a little bit about the tour, let me take you to the home page. Basically over here are 3 options: elementary school, middle school, and high school. So for an example, if you're a middle school teacher, you would click there, elementary school, high school, etc. So let me just click on middle school. And what will come up is 4 areas: language arts, science, social studies, and math. And so what you'll need to do is select one of these depending on your area of expertise. So let's assume for a moment that you're a social studies teacher in the middle school. So I'm going to click on social studies to begin the tour. Now what will show up will be a series of examples of various strategies and tactics from the Make Sense software. And in this case, these are examples from middle school social studies lessons. Now over here on the left is your basic navigation. On the most part, when you're taking these tours, we will not be using the arrows at the top to navigate, but rather just clicking on back and next. And so the way these tours are organized is the software will share with you an example of, for example, a frame graphic organizer, and if you click on next, then it will provide you with a social studies example of how a teacher used that frame. In this case, this was a 6th grade lesson about India that a teacher developed using the frame. So I'm going to click on next again, and this is a frame that a 5th grade teacher developed in conjunction with teaching lessons about the Civil War. And so if I click on next, then that will give you an example of how that frame has been filled out by the class. And then here's an example of a web that was being used, and so I can just keep on clicking on next to take this tour, and it will take me through a wide array of examples from middle school social studies of how these various devices are used. Now if you recall, they're not just frames on this software, there are a variety of other techniques and so forth that are also illustrated here. Now we're not going to do this whole tour now, I'm just basically showing you how this works. When you get to the end of the tour, and to get to the end of the tour, you just keep clicking next. Eventually, it will automatically take you back to the home page. So, what you'll do first is click on the school where you teach, and then click on the subject area that you teach, and then take the tour. Once you finish the tour, it'll take you back home. So part 1 is to just sort of preview what all these techniques are about and examples of them. And then part 2, basically what we're going to ask you to do is to repeat the same tour again, only this time to stop at a particular tactic or strategy that you thought potentially might be useful to you and the kids that you work with, and then do something with that particular strategy. So for an example, let's go back to being a social studies teacher, and I'm going back through the tour the 2nd time, and I'm going to keep clicking on next because one of the things I was really interested in occurred a little bit further along, and it's this compare and contrast frame with Sparta and Athens. And so to complete part 2 of the tour, what we are asking you to do is then to pick a particular strategy or tactic that showed up as an example, and then over in the left it says click here for guidelines and more examples of compare and contrast strategies. So what we'd like you to do is to select one of these tools and then click on the section that says click for more guidelines, and that will take you to a short chapter that describes, in this case, compare and contrast graphic organizers and gives you the examples of them and so forth. And what we'd like you to do is to read that section to get a better idea of how you might use that particular device within your own class. Now this example that I gave dealt with compare and contrast. Now another teacher who was taking this tour might not have been particularly interested in compare and contrast. There might have been another tool that they came across the first time they took it, a little bit further along, and that's something called the links strategy. And so what that teacher would do is click forward to links, and then over here where it says click here for links guidelines, then click on that section, and this provides a more detailed explanation of what that strategy is all about and how to use it and so forth and so on. So basically you pick the strategy or tactic that you are most interested in learning more about, and click on guidelines and read more about that. And then in a few minutes what you'll be doing is taking the assessment component of the mandated training, and I'm going to explain that next. So just to share with you how to get to the assessment component, I'm going to click on Make Sense Home. And then down at the bottom of the home page, it will say click here to access SDE training guidelines. So that brings back those original set of instructions that should be printed out. A little bit further on in the instructions, step 4 says take the test, and basically further down in that is the actual test. Now this is not a traditional test in terms of memorize and regurgitate type thing. This is more like an open book test. And essentially what the assessment section of the training involves are two components. In part 1, what you're required to do is to pick any specific tool from the software that you found particularly interesting, that might be useful to you in teaching a specific lesson, and then to respond to 3 questions about that tool. Now this section has an example of some of the more popular tools that are on the software, like framing big ideas, or the comparison matrix, or use of clarifying tables, or the draft planning form, the links vocabulary, and so forth. And since this is open book, or in this case open software, you can revisit any of these to get information to respond to the assessment questions. Basically the assessment questions for part 1 is which tool or tactic did you select? The next question is what's an instructional objective of the lesson that you teach that might involve using this tool? So what would be the instructional objective? And the third is describe how you anticipate using the tool in the context of your lesson. For example, how might you use it for instruction or in activities or in assignments or to assess kids' knowledge? Just as a little tip, by the way, now I realize this should be printed out for you, but if you're also looking at this on screen, one of the things you can do is on any of these tools, if you click on it, that will take you to a particular section about that tool. And so, for example, I can click on explanation, and so if you want to get some tips about hierarchics, that you can click there. If you're interested in clarifying tables or say draft planning, you can click on that, and that will take you to a specific section on how to use that tool. So essentially, just to recap, part 1 of the assessment is which tool did you select, what's an instructional objective that you might be teaching that involved use of the tool, and then finally describe how you anticipate using that tool in the context of that lesson. Part 2 of the assessment is basically 3 additional questions that you'll need to respond to. The first question is identify an idea about teaching from the Make Sense software that's new to you and potentially useful, and then briefly describe the idea.